Paula Murray, the author of Love and Wine, is joining me in studio. Now, I love wine, and this book explores friendship and the complications that comes along with relationships. She's here to tell us all about it. Hello.
Hi there.
It's nice to see you again.
Yes, nice to see you too.
Now, the last time we were speaking, we were talking about your last book, Shadow
Yes,
Self.
that's right.
And that explored postnatal depression. And that
Correct.
was something that you had experienced in your own personal life.
Exactly, yes. Yeah.
Tell me about Love and Wine and the story we're going to experience in
Well,
this book.
Love and Wine starts with a woman called Helen Shaw, and she comes to South Africa after some heartbreak. And she's British, she comes from the UK, and her uncle has a house in Scarborough. And he says to her, go out there and, feed your soul, sort out your heart, and then you can come back. And she comes a broken person, and it's basically her story of recovery. She leaves London totally broken, but through meeting people, but also through finding herself. I think for me the very strong point is that she needs to find herself first before she can be fixed. So it's not just about her finding someone else to fix her, but about her own recovery, but through a romance, obviously, in the end.
Now, is this also a personal story that you've brought into the fiction realm?
Well, there are certain, like any author, there are certain elements one brings into one's stories. The reason I chose Helen's heartbreak was about her infertility, and she couldn't have a baby, and that brought troubles into her marriage, and she ends up getting divorced. But I also suffered from infertility for many years, and so I understood the whole idea of IVF and trying over and over and watching this baby die, and trying all the petri dishes and all that stuff one has to do. So I felt that I'd be able to understand where she was coming from in terms of her loss, except her loss is so much greater than mine because I was lucky and I ended up having children, whereas she doesn't. Well, at the end of the story, she still doesn't have any children. But yeah, it did come from that place that I thought I would understand. Also how a marriage suffers in terms of the strain of infertility, and how one reacts, as a couple you react differently. And in this case, her husband cheats because he just can't stand the idea of, everything, sex on demand and that sort of thing. So he doesn't like that, and he pulls away from her. And she's so involved in her infertility that she doesn't even notice he's pulling away. So I think part of the realization in this story is that she thinks, oh, he's such a cad, he's betrayed me, etc. But if you read sort of to a deeper level, it ends up being more than just a betrayal, because there's other elements involved.
Now, you've experienced infertility, like you were just telling us, and
Yeah.
you've experienced postnatal depression, which your last book was about.
Yeah.
Is it almost therapeutic for you to write about these things?
It is. I think the infertility at this point, when I wrote the book, was still quite new. It has gotten several edits since then, so it's not so new anymore, and my son is already 6 years old. So this way, it was therapeutic at the time, but reading it back now, it doesn't hurt me as much as it did at the time. Because I remember a journalist friend contacting me and saying, oh, won't you tell me your story about infertility? And I just at the time said, to be honest, I actually can't talk about it. It's just so hard and so soul destroying to go through that. So I said, no, I wouldn't do the interview then. But then it is. I mean, my philosophy in life is, if something terrible happens to me, I'm going to write about this. So I do use it as a kind of therapy, I suppose. But also does give depth to characters that you wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah.
Because everybody, I think, has their own suffering in some way or another. Every family has something that happens. So I think characterization is very important to me, and I needed to understand her motivations. She's also an artist, a painter, and I paint as well. So I could identify with her in a lot of ways. She's not the same as me, and Helen is quite a different character, very timid. I'm not as timid as she is, but she's a very deep character, I think.
Tell me about taking these real life experiences that were very real for you in your own life and turning them into fiction.
There's a sort of a transformation process, I suppose, because the way you experienced it may not be the way your character might experience it as well. So one has to be careful about, firstly, not sounding like you're lecturing, or that you or giving too many technical terms, or choosing certain situations that may not be applicable in fiction. and you don't want to go on about it because people also don't want to read a boring woe is me kind of story.
Yeah,
so
we
you have
really
to
don't.
no, you don't. So you have to cut quite a lot of it out. So you may use quite a lot as motivation or to frame the story. But as I was saying to you earlier, before the interview started, that we did cut 10,000 words or more. So some of that initial infertility stuff that apparently was too heavy was pulled out. So you do use the experiences, and then you take out the stuff that people can relate to, but without getting, especially as this is a romance, it's not a heavy literary book. It's more of a good feel, happy read, hopefully. So you don't want this really heavy stuff, which you might have in a more literary book, which Shadow Self was.
Do you help women who pick up this book who have also experienced infertility in their life or are currently experiencing infertility take something away?
I hope so. I think the whole thing about it is that there are other options available. I mean, I think, even in my situation, we did look for an egg donor and all that sort of thing because I desperately wanted another baby, and we were looking at other alternatives. I think everyone thinks it's the end of the road. And I mean, in terms of my own family, my sister-in-law and brother have just adopted this beautiful little baby. So there are other options. And I think also the story is also about recovery from divorce. And in this situation, she comes back broken, infertile, divorced. You sort of think, this is the end of the road for me. How can things get better? But I think that's the whole thing. When you find yourself again and you find what motivates you, you can recover from whatever situation you're in, I think.